if you really study the Torah well, you understand that the time with the rock is the only time that Moshe ever gave the Jewish people instruction that was different than what God gave Moshe. That was the only time that ever took place. And this Prager guy decides he's going to say, well, look, there's a difference in the wording between the way it's written in Devarim and the way that it's written over here in Numbers, right? And so Moshe must have been the one who said, you know what, go ahead and annihilate the Canaanim when God only said chase them out. Mm-hmm. But that is not true. So I looked this up, because I said I had to look this up because I didn't have the answer. I'm standing here. And if you look in Sefer Mitzvahs, the Rambam writes, he lists all 613 mitzvahs that God gave to Moses on Mount Sinai, and they're all hinted to in the written Torah. And there's a mitzvah, one of the 613 is to wipe out all 7 nations of Canaan. And they're enumerated by the Rambam who these guys were. There are 7 different nations of Canaan. One of them is actually called Canaan, but there's 7 different nations there. And Rambam says we learn that from Devarim 7:1, from Deuteronomy 7:1. That means God is the one who told Moses that law, to annihilate the Canaani, to perform genocide on those 7 nations. Dennis Prager looks to 7:1 and says that's the proof that this came from Moses. Prager needs to go and learn the Rambam, because the Rambam says from that same pasuk, that's where we learn that this comes from God and not anyone else. Okay? So what you're seeing there is it's coming out in the words of Moshe, but Moshe is quoting what he heard from God, and God doesn't come through afterwards and go, hey, Moses, I didn't say that, where we saw that God did get pissed off when Moses came up with a different vort with the story of the hitting of the rock. And from there is your double check, and you see that this is, in effect, God's words, not Moses' words. And this is my problem with Prager, and I just want to editorialize here for a second, okay? Prager demonstrates why one should never read the Bible without the commentaries. Had Prager read that pasuk, looked up what the Rishonim, what the commentaries say, look up what the Rambam says, he wouldn't have come up with what he said. And instead he read the Bible, just the straight verses, and try to put in his own explanations. But when a person tries to do that and make their own explanations, they're going to come out sounding ignorant and perhaps heretical. And he shouldn't have made this mistake. He should have done his homework first before he shut his mouth off. And you notice that I went back and I opened up the books. I didn't want to say anything because I didn't know. And that's what Prager should have done. So he's trying to bring a proof from something and he's got his foot stuck in his mouth now. Isn't that true?
But there's nothing in Devarim 7:1 that says this is God speaking. It's just Moses speaking.
Yeah, but he's quoting the words of God.
How do we know that?
Because that's
what the Rambam says. How do we know the Rambam's right?
Okay, one of the 13 principles of the Rambam has 13, I shouldn't say principles, 13 principles of faith. And one of them is that you have to believe, I think it's number 8, you have to look it up.
Every word of the Torah comes from God.
Every word of the Torah comes from God, and that Moses is a true prophet. And a true prophet merely quotes what God says, and they're not just speaking for themselves. Okay? So you have to believe that. That's an ikar, that's a yesod, foundation of Jewish faith. You have to believe that. If you don't believe that, then you're missing a core principle of Judaism. And you may keep Shabbos, and you may keep kosher, but you got a problem with your Judaism at a very severe level, so severe that it has become our tradition that people who violate the 13 principles of faith are considered apikorsum. They're considered a kofar, a kofrim, a kofar. And a kofar is someone who denies certain parts of Torah, and these are the kind of people who, if you got a they're like, you're supposed to hate them, you're supposed to not bury them with you. They're like, got a status that's not completely Jewish.
But Moses is a fallible human being. He sins in the Torah. He does
That's got nothing to do with it.
Well, why doesn't that have anything to do with it?
Because a true prophet doesn't. His words are perfect. He doesn't have to be perfect. His words are perfect.
But they clearly weren't. For instance, when he said, "Shall we bring forth water from the rock?"
And he was punished for that.
Well, what about when God's trying to enlist him in the book of Shemot, Exodus, and Moses just keeps coming up with every excuse why he doesn't want to do it.
Well, that's okay. That's okay. He didn't want to. He was. That shows anivus. That shows humility. Okay. He was fighting against God. It's like Jonah in the story of Jonah. Jonah was a true prophet. Jonah, and he ran away. He ran from Nineveh, and he didn't want to tell the people of Nineveh that they're going to be destroyed. Right? You're allowed to do that. You're allowed to say, God, I don't want to deliver such a horrible message. I don't want to be part of your book. Erase me from your book. That's okay. But what you can't say is, to the Jewish people, Omer Hashem, God said the following, and then you say stuff that God didn't say. You can't do that.
So, Prager sees a difference between when Moses speaks in God's name, and when God speaks.
That's wonderful. Prager's certainly welcome to open up his own religion, right? And he can have his own rules in his own religion, but he shouldn't call it Judaism. He needs to call it Pragerism. And it's got very little to do with Judaism.
Where did we get the idea that everything that Moses had to say comes from God?
That everything Moses has to say comes from him? That's our Masorah. And that's what's the missing link in all of this. There's a Masorah, that's the Torah tradition. We talked about this before at great length. That the Torah tradition is that God spoke to Moses on Mount Sinai. Everything that God told to Moses, Moses told all the Jewish people. The Jewish people in turn told all their descendants, and generation to generation. And that's Judaism, okay? It's based on the Masorah. The Masorah has always been that. Okay? Masorah is, the way that really the Masorah works is when you want to understand something that's in the Chumash, when you want to understand the Bible, you don't open up and read the Bible without the commentaries. Because then you're going to have to make up your own ideas. We don't make our own interpretations anymore. That doesn't happen. Now, all we do is we follow that which has been said prior to us in previous generations. You open up the Rambam, you open up Rashi. These are the people you look at. This is the great mistake that Prager is, and it's very dangerous. He's not supposed to be making up his own explanations. If he does, it's Pragerism. It's not Judaism. So I know that you love Prager and you quote him all day long on your blog, okay? My attitude toward him is, like I said last week, when it comes to like politics and stuff, the guy's got a grip on it. He needs to lay off Torah unless he's going to approach it from a true Torah perspective and a way of doing it. I don't even believe this guy's from, is he?
No.
He's not. So why are you even quoting him? He's not following the Masorah. He's taken the Masorah and he's throwing it in the trash and he's coming up with his own interpretations. And that's great. Pragerism. Everybody's welcome to go follow Pragerism. I don't. I follow Judaism.
So I hear that you've got 10 commandments for liberal Jews.
Okay, let's get into that. You want to do that right now?
Yes.
Okay. Here's what's going on, folks. Last week, for those of you who didn't tune in, and for those of you who do remember, this is what happened last week. We were speaking about how, we just got sidetracked, and we started talking about how in America, most Jews living here in America are liberal Democrats. And we're trying to understand why that is, right? And Luke suggested, in the name of Prager, happened to be, that an explanation could be that they're looking for most Jews are secular.
Right.
They're completely thrown off the yoke of the Torah. They have no longer anything to do with true Torah Judaism, and so they need a new religion. Yeah. And they've embraced themselves with liberalism, if you will. And I said, okay, well, that kind of makes sense. And perhaps if that were true, there would be I started rambling. I said, there's 3 big mitzvahs that...
I'll hold the holy books.
Oh, you can hold on. That there'd be 3 big mitzvahs that the liberals would have. And I went home and I said, no, you know what? There's a lot more than just 3. Yeah. There's a lot more than just 3 mitzvahs. And so today I've composed what I call the 10 Commandments for liberal Jews.
Great.
Okay, you want to hear them?
Yes.
Okay, these are the 10 Commandments for liberal Jews. Okay, everybody? Here we go. Drum roll.
Da-da-da-dum.
Commandment number 1. You shall take offense to Christians and loudly proclaim Christianity goes against Judaism, while at the same time you shall have no problems championing atheism, which Judaism considers worse than Christianity, and you shall celebrate the male homosexual act